Hello, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to be expanding material from last lesson where we learned how to input data to a script. And today, we're going to learn how to access that data from a PHP script. Specifically, we're going to be learning about what's known as the $_get array, which is how you access input that was passed to a script via the get method. We're going to talk about how we can use input controls to submit information to PHP in the form of an array. And we're also going to talk about how to output array values within strings using variable interpolation. So what is the get array, as it's called? The $_get array is an associative array that's created by PHP every time a PHP page is requested by the get method. And what it does is it goes out and it extracts any name value pairs that were appended as part of the query string of the URL, and it puts them into this array. Basically what it does is it takes, for each name value pair that's appended to the URL, it creates a key, and the key is it sets the key equal to the name of each name value pair, and it sets the value associated with that key equal to the value of the name value pair. So for example, if we have a text field and we have it set at the name first name, when you submit that a form containing that text field, whatever value is assigned to that text field is going to be associated with first name. So it's going to be first name equals Matthew as part of the query string. And what's going to happen is PHP is going to go and create this get array that's always available in your PHP files. And it's going to create a key called first name, and it's going to associate with that key the value that you submitted. So essentially what it's going to be doing, if you remember from our lesson on arrays, so if we submitted in the text field, if we typed the text value, essentially what PHP is going to do is create a key in named first name in the get array and assign it the value. So let's take a look at a script or a basic HTML file that shows how some of this works. What we've done is we've created a basic HTML form that has one text field in it, kind of like we just talked about. And what it allows you to do is submit your name. And actually, before we do that, if we look at the HTML code, it's a form that uses the get method because that's what we've been using. And the action, if you'll notice, is something different from what we talked about in the last lesson. It's actually a separate file. In this case, it's a PHP file. And now we're going to learn how to access that information. So this PHP file, processNameForm.php, is going to be able to use that information that we provide in the text field. So if we go ahead and I submit my name, it's going to go to processNameForm.php, and as you can see, it appended the name value pair person equals Matthew to the URL. And what I've done is actually just done a print R, use the print R function to output what the get associative array looks like. And as you can see, the get array contains one key and one value, and the key is person, and the value is Matthew. And if we actually go back and look at our HTML, we can see that on the input field, or the input tag, for a text field, the name is person. And so person directly corresponds with the person that's the person key in the get array. So let's go look at the code that processes the name. It's called processNameForm.php, and basically we have some PHP code here at the beginning that outputs what we just showed you. It just outputs the contents of the get array. So let's go ahead and delete that and do something a little more useful. I've commented out a section of code here that's going to that's going to output a thank you message, and it's going to quote the person's name that was submitted on the form. So if I get rid of these comment tags, if we go back to our page, let's try a different name and click submit. Now what we've done is output a message that says thank you with the name submitted, John Smith, for entering your name. You have now accessed PHP data for the first time. The sky is the limit. And create a little link to return to the form. Now if we go back and look at the code here, all it simply did was it has a couple of echo statements that echo some HTML code, and then one echo statement that references the get array, and because the name of the text field which we submitted with the form was called person, we denote the person key as the get array, and what that's going to do is go to the get array, get the value associated with the person key, which in our case I think was Joe Smith, and then it's going to output it. So it's basically going to add it to the output string. And so that's basically an introduction into how get works with simple name value pairs. So things can get actually a little more advanced. PHP has a nice feature in that it sort of allows you to basically create arrays in the get associative array that it provides for you. And the way you do that is you provide in the name attribute of different input elements, you provide a name with square brackets and opening and closing square brackets. And when you do that, and when you submit the form, what that tells PHP is that any name value pair that has the name items, so for example, item, that's neater, equals 1001, it's going to create a key called items, and then it's going to associate it with that key an array. And for every every name value pair that has the name items, it's going to add that value to that array. And this is typical use of this is in select drop-down menus where you can select multiple items from a list. And the way that you access the values within your PHP script is, as we learned in the multi-dimensional array section of the array lesson, is you specify get, and then in this case items, so that's saying get me the array associated with the key items, and then you specify an index, a numeric index, to access the different values in the array. So if we go and look at another form called indexArrayForm.html, we can see we have a select box where we can select multiple things, and the way you do that is with the control key, control click, and we can submit it. And what you can see here is again, to demonstrate how the get array is formed, you can see that, load up a little bit, using the print R statement, that the get array contains one key value pair. The key is named items, and it contains two elements, 1001 and 3001, which are the IDs of the product that we selected, and they have the indexes 0 and 1. Now if we actually go and look at the HTML for the form, we can see that we've declared, as in the slide, a select drop-down menu, given it the name items with with the opening and closing square bracket, and then we've simply just added option tags with different values. And what's going to happen is when you submit that form, the browser is going to append to the URL, because we're using the get method in this form. It's going to append to the URL items equals, and then it's going to list the item ID of each item we chose from the list. So if we actually go back and look at when we submitted the form, you can see in the top URL here there's actually items listed twice, in the query string, items equals 1001 and items equals 3001. And because there's brackets associated with those items, PHP is going to know that that's going to refer to an array, and it's going to create an array with those values. So we just saw how PHP, you can use indexed arrays or numeric arrays in your forms. You can also use associative arrays. For example, we can have two text input boxes or text fields, and we can assign them the name like this, where the array would be called person and the key of the array would be called first. We can also do it for another one with last. So basically what this is going to do is when you submit this form, PHP is going to parse the URL. It's going to create a a key in the get array named person, to which it's going to associate an associative array with the key first and the key last, along with whatever values were submitted to those corresponding text boxes. And one thing to note is that unlike in PHP, when PHP code, when you reference something in an associative array, you enclose it in quotation marks. When you do this in HTML, you don't actually do that. You leave out the quotation marks, and PHP will know how to handle that. So let's take a look at how associative arrays work. We have a form, associative array form.html, and it's going to allow us to input a first and last name. And we submit the form. We're going to do the print R again on the get array, and it's going to show you that the get array contains one key value pair. The first key, or the only key, is named person, and it's associated a data value, which is an associative array that has two keys, first and last. And first is set to Matthew, last is set to Makaj, which were the first and last names that were entered into the text fields. And so if we actually go and look at the HTML form itself, we can see that we have two text input fields that we created, and using the square bracket syntax, we typed person, open bracket first, close bracket, to correspond to the first name in the person array, and then this one right here corresponds to the last name in the person array. So these are directly correlated to these in the get array. Now if we actually go and look at the code, let's get rid of the print R statement, and there's actually, we can do something a little more useful than that, and this is going to demonstrate how to actually access the different values in the get array that created an associative array called person. So one way we can do that is we can declare a variable called person and set it equal to to the value associated with the person key in the get associative array, which, as we saw in our case, is this array here that contains first key and a last key, and then the values associated with them. And then what we do is we just create an output message to output the person's name, give them a welcome message. And so we have a couple of echo statements. Here's just a welcome statement. And then because this is an associative array, we use the square bracket syntax for associative arrays to access the name associated with the key first, which was what was entered in the first text box. And then we also output the last name, which we access via the last key. And if we go ahead and load this in the browser, let's try a different name. Oh, I guess I didn't save it. Let's try one more time. you can see it says welcome, and then John Smith. And this John Smith was, this is the first name that was outputted from that person array, associative array, and Smith was the last name that's part of the person array, as you can see here. So I've also created another script that shows a little more, or more form elements, and form input controls and how they work, similar to in last lesson. We go to echoform.html. Shrink this down a little bit. This is similar to a form we saw in the last lecture. It has a field for a text field, a password field, a radio button, a checkbox, a multiple selection box, text field, a hidden field, and so forth. And if we go and put in some information like username, password, male, are you married, and then select a couple of our favorite RGB colors, enter a comment, and click submit, I'm going to use the print R again, print underscore R function again on the get array, and that's going to show you what's actually was passed on by the get method. We can see that in the get array there was a text field named username, and the value associated with it was username. There's a password field, text field associated, I guess I misspelled password, that's associated with the value password. Additionally, on this form, for the two questions, sex and the checkbox, are you married, I've actually created an associative array called personal info, and given it two keys, sex and married. And if we actually go and look at the HTML for the form, we can see that for the radio box, or for the radio buttons, we've declared the name personal info, and then put in square brackets the name of the key we want to assign that value to, in this case sex. And then if we look down here at the married checkbox, we've assigned it the name personal info as well, which means put it in the same associative array as this up here, except it's going to use the key married. And so that's why when we submit the form, it creates this personal info array. Additionally, we've also created a numerically indexed array called fave colors, and what that was for when you selected your multiple, you had the option to select multiple colors, multiple favorite RGB colors. And so what happens in that one is, as we had seen in the indexed array example before, for the select tag, we give it the name fave colors and then follow it by the opening closing square brackets, which tells PHP when it finds any key value pairs that have the name fave colors that they're going to be part of one array. Because no index is specified, it's going to be a numerically indexed array, and then so any options that are selected are added to this array. So in this case, let's go ahead and try again. We'll select blue and green, and we submit it. We can see that it has added green and blue to the fave colors array, and they have the index 0 and 1. Additionally, the large text area has comment called comments, has the string that we included associated with it. And also down here, you can see it has the value of a hidden tag. We had a hidden input tag in our HTML. If we go down to the bottom and look at it, input type, and we called it hidden. We assigned it the name hidden, and then we gave it the value IP 192.168.1.1, which may be some data that is of use to our script, but we don't necessarily need the user to see. And so when we loaded up the form and output the get array, we can see that hidden value, even though it wasn't actively submitted by the user, does get put into the get array. So let's look again at the process echoform.php, and what it does is as the other files had done, it just uses a print R statement to output the contents of get. But we can use it again to do something more useful. In this case, we're just going to simply echo, and that's why it's called the echo form, just echo all the data that was submitted via the form. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of echo statements in which we create a unordered list, and for each list element, we output the value associated with each input field. So for example, for the username text box, we're going to use the get array, access the get array, give it the key username, which was the name in echo form.html, which was associated with the username text field. And we do that for all of the different input boxes. So we do it for password. Additionally, as you can see down here, we had mentioned that we created a associative array, personal info, with the key sex and married. And as you can see here, the way we access that data from the get array is using the double square bracket syntax that you use for multi-dimensional arrays. And to review that again, what this first part here says is give me the value associated with the personal info key in the get array, and that happens to actually be an an associative array, and it contains different keys, and one of them is sex, and so this says to get the value associated with the key sex. This one does the same thing, except it does get the value associated with the key married. Now down here, what we've done is for the favorite colors, if we look back at the HTML, we named it fav colors with an opening and closing bracket, which is going to create an index array in the get array by PHP. PHP is going to do that automatically. And what we can do is we can output, in this case, the first color selected, and the first color in an index array, or the first item in an index array always begins with a 0 index, if you'll remember. And because this is a multi-dimensional array, we use the square bracket syntax again. And this again says, give me the value in the get array associated with the key variable fav colors, which is itself going to be array, and then give me the first element in that, which depends on what we selected in the text box. And this just outputs the comments and hidden. Remove this last comment, save. If we reload the form, and let's pick red and green this time, female, password, new comment, and hit submit. We can see the formatted output. It says our username we entered was username, password was PAWD. It outputs the sex of the user, whether they're married or not. It outputs the first color selected, which in this case was red. If we had changed it and done green and blue, it's going to output green, because green will be the first element added to the fav colors array, and then you can see it outputs the in a printed form, in a prettier format, the content of the comment input element and what was the value of the hidden input element. So now I want to continue on a topic that we covered in a previous lecture about variable interpolation. And in this case, we're going to talk about how to output array variables within a double quoted string. We know that we can do that for example, integer, float, and other string variables. We can include them within the double quotes of another string, and the echo statement will go ahead and replace the variable with its value. But we can also do that for arrays. This is quite useful, and there's particular syntax for that. For indexed arrays, such as here, basically what you do is you access the value of the array simply as you would in your PHP code. You simply type the variable name, which is a $, followed by the variable name, and then square brackets with the integer index enclosed in between them. And what that's going to do is replace this variable value with whatever's in the second, whatever the second value is in this indexed array. So that's pretty intuitive because it's exactly the same way you would quote it in, or you would access it in PHP code. Now for associative arrays, it's a little bit different. It's similar syntax, except that if you'll notice, there's no quotes around the key name. So you access it in the same way as you would in a PHP file, except you leave the quotes out. This is known as a simple syntax. There's also a complex or a curly brace syntax, which is used for more complex, outputting more complex things within strings. And as we go through the course, we'll find different things, more complex, for example, like object values and function output to output. But if you want to use the quotes and you feel more comfortable that way, you can enclose everything in curly braces and add the quotes. Now this curly brace syntax is also used for complex things, and one of those being if you want to output a multi-dimensional array. Oops. Let's say assoc was a multi-dimensional array. This is how you would specify that in your code. So let's go take a look back at the process echo form.php and put some of this into action. And what you will see is it's going to turn this. Right now we have 3 echo statements to output a list item that says username and then outputting the username that was provided. So we can actually turn these 3 lines of code into one, and that's through variable interpolation. And because this is an associative array, we go ahead and remove the quotation marks. Oops. And if we go and load this page up, and submit it, you can see that it outputs the username just as we expected it to before. So as you can see, it definitely makes the code a little bit easier to read. Less lines to accomplish the same thing, and it's pretty intuitive. You know that it's going to replace this get username with whatever value is in the get array associated with the key username. So let me just go ahead and quickly do this for these other values. And this is a multi-dimensional array, so we have to use, as mentioned, a special curly brace syntax. And with curly brace syntax, we leave the quotation marks in. The same goes for multi-dimensional arrays. Containing partly or one dimension, or one of the arrays is an index array. Oops, sorry, I forgot up here to get rid of the single quotes. And so now we've gone and changed all of those lines, which was 3 lines per list item, into 1 line. And when we go ahead and load this page up again, it's going to output the same information, but we're making use of variable interpolation with associative arrays and index arrays. So let's go ahead and if we go ahead and submit it, we can see that everything outputs as we had expected from before. So that's how to make use of variable interpolation for arrays, and you'll find that you'll be using that a lot throughout your PHP code. So for today's homework challenge, basically I'm going to have you get practice with using the get array. You're going to be using it all the time in your PHP scripts because you're constantly interacting with the user and receiving form input. So basically, I just want to have you create a regular HTML file that contains an HTML form, and just put it in the Lecture 12 directory, and have the form contain all of these different elements, or all these different input controls. And then create another file, a PHP script, that's just basically going to echo the data submitted via the HTML form. And make sure that when you create this PHP script that you set the action attribute of the form element to whatever you named your HTML file up here. And so actually the form element is going to be in the HTML file. Make sure that you set the action equal to the name of the PHP script that's going to be echoing the data. Then what I want you to do is experiment with outputting and accessing values of the get array. So use non-array names for your controls. So for example, like name equals text1, and just practice outputting those different values from your PHP script. Then change some of the controls so that they have array names. Like we talked about, maybe you'll have a select drop-down box that'll have the name, maybe it's states, and create it like that. And do that for both the index array and associative array variety, and practice outputting it. And when you output the value of the get array, practice using what we learned in the last slide, which was the variable interpolation that you can use with double-quoted strings to output the values of arrays, and experiment with both the simple and complex syntax. The simple syntax is just a variable name, and the complex syntax actually uses the curly braces around it. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching educator.com, and look forward to seeing you at the next lesson.